Part 1. The Disappearance. On the morning of October 12, 2018, the Madison County Sheriff's Department received a call that would unravel one of the most disturbing cases in the region's history. The caller was David Brennan, a 41-year-old insurance broker from a quiet suburb outside of Portland, Oregon. His voice was steady, almost too steady, as he reported that his wife had vanished. Her name was Sarah Brennan, 38 years old, marketing director at a mid-sized tech firm. Mother of 2 daughters, ages 9 and 12. No history of mental illness, no financial troubles, no indication she would ever leave her family. According to David's statement, Sarah had been there when he went to bed the night before. When he woke up at 6:47 a.m., she was gone. Her car was in the driveway. Her purse was on the kitchen counter. Her phone was on the nightstand, still plugged into the charger. She just wouldn't leave like this, David told the responding officer. Not without her phone. Not without telling me. The officer noted something in his report that day. Something small. David's hands never shook. His eyes never welled up. He seemed concerned, yes, but not devastated. Not the way a husband should be when his wife disappears into thin air. The scene. When Detective Laura Friedman arrived at the Brennan residence that afternoon, she walked through a home that looked like it had been staged for a real estate showing. Everything was in its place. No signs of struggle. No forced entry. The alarm system showed it had been disarmed at 11:43 p.m. the night before and never reactivated. But something felt wrong. The house was too clean, too perfect. Detective Friedman had worked missing persons cases for 17 years. She knew what a lived-in home looked like. This wasn't it. The kitchen counters gleamed. The floors showed recent mopping marks. The bathroom sink was dry, with no water spots or toothpaste residue. Someone had cleaned. Recently. Thoroughly. Sarah's laptop was open on the dining room table. Her email was still logged in. The last message she'd sent was to a colleague at 10:15 p.m., confirming a Monday morning meeting. Detective Friedman noted the subject line, Q4 campaign strategy, see you Monday. Sarah had been planning for Monday. She had been making plans. People who disappear voluntarily don't confirm Monday morning meetings at 10:15 p.m. on Thursday. Detective Friedman interviewed the 2 daughters. Both were visibly shaken. The youngest, Emma, kept asking when her mother was coming home. The oldest, Claire, said something that caught the detective's attention. Dad told us not to go into the garage this morning. When asked why, Claire shrugged. He said there was a mess out there. That he needed to clean it first. What kind of mess? Detective Friedman asked. He didn't say. But when I walked past the garage door this morning, I heard the washing machine running. Mom never does laundry in the morning. She always does it at night. Detective Friedman made a note. Then she walked out to the garage. It was spotless. The concrete floor was still damp in places. The smell of cleaning solution hung in the air. And in the corner, next to the water heater, sat a brand new bottle of industrial-strength floor cleaner, 3/4 empty. Something had happened in this garage, and someone had worked very hard to erase it. The husband, David Brennan, had lived in Oregon his entire life. He'd met Sarah at a college fundraiser in 2003. They married 2 years later. By all accounts, they were a stable, successful couple. David worked for a regional insurance firm where he managed high-value commercial accounts. He traveled frequently, sometimes 2 or 3 times a month. Denver, Seattle, San Francisco, always for work. Neighbors described him as polite but distant. The kind of man who waved from his driveway but never stopped to chat. He kept to himself, one neighbor recalled. Sarah was the friendly one. She organized the block parties. She brought us cookies at Christmas, David. I don't think I ever had a real conversation with him. When detectives asked David about his whereabouts the night Sarah disappeared, he provided a detailed timeline. He'd arrived home from a business trip to Seattle at 8:30 p.m. Sarah had dinner waiting. They ate together, watched a show, went to bed around 11 p.m. He fell asleep. When he woke up, she was gone. His story was consistent. Too consistent. Detective Friedman requested phone records, bank statements, and travel receipts. What she found would crack the case wide open. Part 2. The investigation. The phone records. Sarah's phone records showed nothing unusual. Calls to her office, texts to her sister, a few messages to her daughter's school. But David's phone told a different story. In the 6 months prior to Sarah's disappearance, David had made over 300 calls to a number registered in Seattle. The calls were always made when he was traveling, never from home. The pattern was meticulous. Every call was placed between 8 p.m. and 11 p.m. Pacific time, always when David claimed to be in his hotel room after business meetings. The calls lasted anywhere from 20 minutes to over 2 hours. Detective Friedman cross-referenced the calls with David's travel schedule. Every single one aligned with his business trips to Seattle. But there was something else. Text messages. Hundreds of them. I miss you. Can't wait to see you next week. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me. The messages were intimate, romantic, completely at odds with the image of a happily married man. Detectives ran the number. It belonged to a woman named Melissa Torres. When they pulled Melissa's phone records, they found something that made the case even more complex. She had been calling and texting David just as frequently, but her messages stopped abruptly on October 10, 2018, 2 days before Sarah disappeared. The last text Melissa sent read, "When are you going to tell her about us?" David never responded. The other woman, Melissa Torres, was 29 years old, a dental hygienist living in a modest apartment in the Capitol Hill neighborhood of Seattle. When detectives knocked on her door 3 days after Sarah's disappearance, Melissa opened it with a look of genuine confusion. She had no idea Sarah Brennan was missing. She had no idea David Brennan was married. "He told me he was divorced," Melissa said, her voice shaking. "He said he had 2 daughters, but that his ex-wife had custody. He visited me every few weeks. He said he worked in Seattle part-time." Melissa had been seeing David for nearly 18 months. He'd told her his name was Daniel Cross. He'd given her a different phone number, a different email address. He'd even shown her a fake driver's license. "I loved him," Melissa said. "I thought he loved me." Detectives asked if David had been with her the night Sarah disappeared. Melissa checked her calendar. "No, he told me he had to cancel his trip that week. Family emergency," he said. According to flight records, David had booked a ticket to Seattle for October 11th, but he'd canceled it that morning. The refund was processed at 9:47 a.m. David had lied. He'd told his wife he was traveling. He'd told Melissa he couldn't come. So where had he really been? The bank account's financial forensics revealed something investigators hadn't expected. David had 3 separate bank accounts Sarah didn't know about. One was linked to his alias, Daniel Cross. That account received deposits from David's primary checking account, usually in amounts between $500 and $2,000. The money funded his life with Melissa, dinners, hotel rooms, gifts. The second account was more troubling. It had been opened 4 years earlier under David's real name, but at a different bank. Over the course of those 4 years, David had moved nearly $120,000 into it. Small transfers, nothing that would trigger Sarah's attention. The third account had been opened just 6 weeks before Sarah disappeared. It was a joint account. The second name on it was not Sarah Brennan. It was someone named Catherine Lynn. The second woman. Catherine Lynn was a 36-year-old software engineer living in San Francisco. She'd met David Brennan at a conference in May 2018. He'd introduced himself as David Cross, a widower who'd lost his wife to cancer 3 years earlier. He said he was ready to start over. Catherine had fallen for him quickly. He was charming, attentive, generous. He told her he traveled to the Bay Area frequently for work and wanted to build a life there with her. He'd shown her photos of his late wife, except the woman in the photos wasn't real. Detectives later discovered David had downloaded stock images from a memorial website. He'd even created a fake obituary to show Catherine if she ever asked too many questions. The level of planning was staggering. David had rented a small studio apartment in San Francisco under his alias. He kept clothes there, toiletries, a laptop that contained nothing but files related to his fictional life as David Cross. Catherine visited the apartment several times. She had no reason to doubt him. They'd opened the joint account in late August. David said it was for their future, a house, a wedding, a fresh start. "He showed me pictures of homes we could buy," Catherine told detectives. "Places in Marin County, beautiful houses with views of the bay." He said he'd already talked to a realtor, that by spring, we'd be living together. Catherine had deposited $15,000 of her own savings into the account. When detectives contacted her on October 16th, she broke down. "I thought we were going to get married," she said through tears. He told me he was filing paperwork to relocate to California permanently. He said by Christmas we'd be living together. Detective Friedman asked Catherine to describe their last interaction. Catherine pulled out her phone and showed them a photo. It was taken on October 9th, just 3 days before Sarah disappeared. David and Catherine stood on the Golden Gate Bridge, his arm around her waist, both of them smiling. The photo was time-stamped 6:23 p.m. "We had dinner that night at this little Italian place in North Beach," Catherine said. "He told me he loved me. He said he'd finally found someone who understood him." Detectives asked Catherine when she'd last seen David. "October 10th, she said. "He stayed with me that whole week. He left on the 11th, said he had to fly back to Seattle for a meeting. But David hadn't flown to Seattle. He'd flown home to Portland the day before Sarah disappeared. And when detectives checked the joint bank account, they found something Catherine didn't know about. 2 days before Sarah vanished, David had transferred Catherine's $15,000 out of the account. All of it, into another account Catherine had never heard of. The timeline breaks. Detective Friedman sat in the interrogation room with a diagram on the wall. 3 women, 3 lives, 3 sets of lies. David had been living as 3 different men. To Sarah, he was the devoted husband and father. To Melissa, he was Daniel Cross, the divorced consultant rebuilding his life. To Catherine, he was David Cross, the widower looking for love again. But the timeline didn't add up. Flight records showed David had been in San Francisco from October 4th through October 10th. He'd returned to Portland late on the 11th. His car had been spotted on a traffic camera 12 miles from his home at 10:52 p.m. that night. But he'd told police he arrived home at 8:30 p.m. He'd lied about when he got home, and Sarah had been alive at 10:15 p.m. based on her last email, which meant David had been somewhere else between 10:52 p.m. and 11:43 p.m. when the home alarm was disarmed. Detectives requested footage from every camera along the route between the airport and David's house. What they found changed everything. Part 3. The evidence, the gas station. At 11:04 p.m. on October 11, a camera at a 24-hour gas station captured David Brennan's vehicle pulling into the lot. He stayed for 6 minutes. He didn't pump gas. Security footage showed him entering the convenience store, walking to the back, and purchasing a single item: a large bottle of bleach. He paid cash. The garage armed with a search warrant. Forensic teams returned to the Brennan home on October 18th. They focused on the garage. Under ultraviolet light, the concrete floor lit up in scattered patterns. Someone had cleaned recently, thoroughly. The patterns told a story. There were concentrated areas near the center of the garage floor, about 6 feet from the interior door that led into the house. The luminol patterns showed drag marks. Someone had moved something heavy across the floor, something that left a trail. Luminol testing revealed traces of blood. Not much, just enough. DNA analysis confirmed it was Sarah's. The blood had been in the garage. Someone had tried to scrub it away. But blood is persistent. It seeps into concrete, into grout lines, into microscopic cracks invisible to the naked eye. Forensic analyst Dr. Patricia Nguyen testified later that based on the distribution pattern, the blood evidence suggested a significant injury had occurred. Not a small cut, not a minor accident. The pattern we found, Dr. Nguyen explained to investigators, is consistent with blunt force trauma. When blood hits a surface from an impact injury, it creates a specific spatter pattern. What we found in that garage shows someone was injured badly enough to bleed in multiple locations. Detectives also found something else. In the corner of the garage, hidden behind a stack of storage bins, was a large black duffel bag. Inside the bag were clothes, a pair of jeans, a sweater. Both had been cut into pieces. Both belonged to Sarah. The jeans had a distinctive feature. Sarah's sister later identified them as a pair Sarah had bought just 2 weeks before she disappeared. They had embroidered flowers along the left ankle. The embroidery was still visible on one of the cut pieces. Why would someone cut up clothes? Forensic teams had a theory. The clothes had likely been stained with blood. Instead of washing them, which could leave DNA evidence in the washing machine, someone had cut them into pieces. Easier to dispose of, easier to hide. But David had made a mistake. He'd hidden the bag instead of destroying it completely. And that mistake would help convict him. The storage unit. When detectives ran David's credit card records, they found a recurring charge to a storage facility 30 miles outside of Portland. The unit had been rented under the name Daniel Cross. On October 20th, investigators obtained a warrant and opened the unit. Inside, they found a second life, carefully organized and hidden. There were clothes, documents under the name Daniel Cross, a second cell phone, a laptop, and there was something else. A rolled-up top, stiff, stained. Forensic analysis confirmed it. Blood. Sarah's blood. The confrontation. On October 22nd, 2018, Detective Friedman sat across from David Brennan in an interrogation room. She laid out the evidence piece by piece. The phone records, the secret accounts, the two other women, the bleach purchase, the blood in the garage, the tarp in the storage unit. David listened in silence. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and did something unexpected. He smiled. "You think you know what happened," he said quietly. "But you don't." Detective Friedman leaned forward. "Then tell me." David folded his hands on the table. "I want a lawyer." The arrest. David Brennan was arrested and charged with the murder of Sarah Brennan. The trial began in March 2019. The prosecution's case was built on circumstantial evidence. The blood, the tarp, the lies, the double life. But there was one problem. They never found Sarah's body. Part 4. The trial, the defense. David's attorney argued that the evidence was inconclusive. Blood in a garage didn't prove murder. People had accidents. The tarp could have been used for anything. And without a body, how could the state prove Sarah was even dead? "My client is guilty of infidelity," the defense attorney told the jury. "He's guilty of lying. He's guilty of being a terrible husband. But he is not guilty of murder." The defense presented an alternative theory. Sarah had discovered David's affairs. She'd confronted him, and she'd left, voluntarily. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," the defense attorney continued, "my client made mistakes, terrible mistakes. He betrayed his wife. He lied to multiple women. He lived a double life, perhaps even a triple life, but none of that makes him a murderer." The defense called character witnesses. David's co-workers testified that he was professional, reliable, never violent. His insurance clients said he was trustworthy and competent. The defense even suggested that Sarah herself might have been planning to leave. "The prosecution wants you to believe Sarah Brennan was a perfect wife in a perfect marriage," the attorney said. "But what if she wasn't happy? What if she'd discovered her husband's affairs weeks earlier and was planning her own exit?" They presented Sarah's browsing history from her laptop. In the weeks before her disappearance, she'd searched for divorce attorneys. She'd looked up articles about starting over after betrayal. She'd even browsed apartment listings in Seattle, the same city where Melissa lived. "What if Sarah Brennan knew?" the defense attorney asked. "What if she was gathering evidence for a divorce? What if she decided to disappear on her own terms, to make her husband suffer, to punish him for what he'd done?" It was a bold strategy, and for a moment it seemed like it might work. Two jurors looked uncertain. One took notes frantically during the defense's closing argument. But the prosecution wasn't finished. The prosecution had one final card to play. They called Melissa Torres to the stand. The courtroom fell silent as Melissa entered. She looked fragile, her hands shaking as she placed them on the Bible to swear her oath. For the next 2 hours, Melissa testified about her relationship with David, about the lies, about the fake identity, about the man she thought she knew. "He told me he was divorced," Melissa said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He said his ex-wife lived in Portland with their 2 daughters. He showed me photos of them. He talked about custody arrangements, about how hard it was to be away from his kids." The prosecutor showed Melissa a series of text messages. "Ms. Torres, do you recognize these messages?" Melissa nodded. "Those are texts I sent to David in September. I was asking him when I could meet his daughters. He kept saying soon. He said the girls needed more time to adjust to the divorce." "And did you ever meet them?" "No. Why not?" "Because they didn't know I existed. Because their mother was still alive. Because everything he told me was a lie." Melissa began to cry. The prosecutor handed her a tissue and waited. Then came the moment that would seal David's fate. "Ms. Torres, did the defendant ever say anything to you about his wife?" Melissa hesitated. Then she nodded. "In August, maybe 6 weeks before Sarah disappeared, we were having dinner at this little Vietnamese place I loved. I asked him if he ever missed being married. Not to his ex-wife specifically, but just being married, having that partnership. And what did he say? He got really quiet. He stared at his food for a long time. Then he looked up at me and said something I didn't think much of at the time. What did he say? Melissa's voice dropped to a whisper. He said, "Sometimes the only way to start over is to erase the past." The courtroom erupted. The judge called for order. The prosecutor let the silence hang for a moment before asking the next question. "Ms. Torres, in the context of your conversation, what did you think he meant by that?" "I thought he meant letting go of emotional baggage, moving on from old relationships. But now," Melissa's voice broke, "now I know he meant something else entirely." The defense attorney objected, claiming speculation, but the damage was done. The prosecution then called David's older daughter, Claire, to the stand. She was 19 now, a sophomore in college, but she looked small in the witness chair. "Claire," the prosecutor said gently, "I know this is difficult, but I need to ask you about the morning of October 12th. Claire nodded. "You told police that your father said not to go into the garage. Is that correct?" "Yes." "Did he say why?" "He said he'd spilled something, that he needed to clean it up before we went in there." "Did he seem upset?" Claire thought for a moment. "No, that's the weird part. He seemed normal, like it was just another morning. He made us pancakes for breakfast. He asked Emma about her homework. He didn't act like anything was wrong." "When did he tell you your mother was missing?" "After breakfast. He said she'd left early for a work meeting and wasn't answering her phone. He said not to worry, that she probably just forgot to charge it." "Did that seem unusual to you?" "My mom never forgot to charge her phone. Never. She was always organized, always prepared. And she wouldn't have left for a work meeting on a Friday without telling us goodbye." Claire's testimony was devastating. This wasn't a theoretical victim. This was a daughter describing the last morning she ever saw her mother, and her father had made pancakes. The verdict. On April 17th, 2019, the jury returned a verdict. Guilty. David Brennan was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He never showed emotion, not when the verdict was read, not when his daughters sobbed in the gallery, not when the judge asked if he had anything to say. He simply stood, turned, and walked out of the courtroom. Part 5. What remains the search to this day. Sarah Brennan's body has never been found. Investigators have searched forests, rivers, landfills. They've followed dozens of leads. They've interviewed hundreds of people. Nothing. Some believe David disposed of her body during one of his many trips. Seattle, San Francisco, somewhere along the highway between cities. Others believe she's closer than anyone thinks, buried in a place he visited often. A place no one thought to look. Sarah's daughters, were placed in the care of her sister. They rarely speak about their father. They don't visit him in prison. Claire, now 20, recently gave her first and only interview to a local news station. "I don't think about him as my dad anymore," she said. "I think about him as the man who took my mother away from us." When asked if she believes her father killed Sarah, Claire paused. "I know he did, and I think he knows exactly where she is." The unanswered questions. Why did David kill Sarah? Was it the affair with Melissa? The relationship with Catherine? The financial strain of living 3 separate lives? Or was it something darker? Something no one will ever fully understand. In a letter sent to Detective Friedman 2 years after his conviction, David wrote only one sentence. "Some doors should never be opened." Investigators believe he was referring to the garage, to what happened that night. But the letter raised another question. What else did David Brennan hide? What other secrets died with Sarah? Epilogue. On October 12th each year, a bouquet of white lilies is placed on the front steps of the Brennan home. No one knows who leaves them. The house has been sold twice since Sarah's disappearance. Both families moved out within a year. Neighbors say they hear sounds at night, footsteps in the garage, a door closing that was never opened. Detective Friedman retired in 2022. She still keeps Sarah's case file on her desk. "I think about her every day," Friedman said in a recent interview. "I think about where she is. I think about what he did to her. And I think about the moment she realized the man she trusted most in the world was the one who would take everything from her. David Brennan will die in prison. Sarah Brennan remains missing, and somewhere, buried in silence, the truth waits. Case status, open victim, Sarah Marie Brennan, last seen October 11th, 2018. Suspect David Brennan, convicted, life without parole. Body recovered, no. If you have any information regarding the whereabouts of Sarah Brennan, please contact the Madison County Sheriff's Department.